Hi everyone, welcome to Lisa's Stamp Studio. My name is Lisa Curcio. Today's card is going to be using the Carols of Christmas bundle and of course some bling. Look at this beautiful card. I'm going to give you some tips along the way about the glitter and of course about the sequins, and I'm excited to give you a big tip about using the background stamp. You can find all the cutting dimensions for today's card along with pictures and supplies over on my blog. If you're here from YouTube, the link is right down in the description, making it easy for you to find. And if you're interested in one of the current catalogs, I'd be happy to send you a complimentary copy if you don't already have a demonstrator. Just leave me a comment below. Let's head over to the stamp table and let's get started. Here's the card that we'll be creating today. Isn't it pretty? I'm going to show you some tips on using the background stamp as well as applying some of the glitter here on that tree. I'm using a half sheet of crumb cake cardstock. Remember, you're going to be able to find all the cutting dimensions for today's project over on my blog. If you're here from YouTube, go ahead and click on the description of the video below and there'll be a link right there to take you to it. And now comes my background stamp. This stamp is called Sheet Music. Isn't it beautiful? And it's going to be great to use all year round. You can see that the image is very, very large. So I like to use my background stamps face up on my work surface. And you're probably thinking, what? Well, let me show you. I'm going to use the crumb cake ink on the stamp. So I'm going to open it up, and while it's laying down, I'm going to ink it up this way. It's going to be a lot easier than you trying to manipulate the stamp on top of the ink. I've got a piece of very vanilla cardstock, and I'm going to lay that on top. Most of you want to pick up this background stamp and try to flip it over. My grid paper is here. I'm folding it over the top like a protective cover, and then I'm rubbing. And what I'm actually doing is I'm transferring the design from the bottom up. How hard you press is completely up to you. If you want kind of a vintagey, aged look background, you can just do this very, very lightly. I like to use my paper piercing tool to help pick that right up off of there. And so there we have it. We have a beautiful background instantly made. This does fit on your Stampin' Scrub, so you can go ahead and clean that. I always recommend rubbing off the excess ink as much as you can before you go and clean it on your scrub, specifically because it's so large, and that'll help reduce your trips to the sink to help rinse out that scrub to keep the water clean. I've also cut a piece of cherry cobbler cardstock. This is just 1/8 inch larger than the vanilla that I just stamped. And I'm going to add some adhesive to the back side of this. And I'm going to layer this on top of that cherry cobbler piece just to get a really nice frame. So leaving a real thin border all the way around. This is going to go on the base of our card. So I'm going to go ahead and flip that over. Add some more adhesive in those four corners. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but there seems to be musical notes that go in both directions to me. I'm no musician, so I never know which is the top and which is the bottom. So I kind of go by the letters here. So I'm going to go ahead and mount that to the top. Again, a very thin layer of cardstock all around there just to complement this card. Okay, so now we've got the card base. Let's work on the focal point. On a piece of very vanilla cardstock, I'm going to stamp the words Peace on Earth. And these come from the stamp set called Carols of Christmas. Isn't it beautiful? So many nostalgic pieces in here, like the small reindeers and the ornaments. We've got some borders, but the best thing about the stamp set are the framelits that go with it. And I'll show those to you in just a minute. So I'm going to use my cherry cobbler for this one. I'm going to ink up my stamp. And this is going to go right in the middle. So lots of firm, even pressure to trace out that design. These letters are solid, so I want to make sure I get a good impression. And then lift. Be sure to clean the stamp very well. My Stampin' Scrub is just off camera, so I've gone ahead and I've cleaned that really well, and I like to make sure that my stamp is dry. Because on a scratch piece of paper, the same color, very vanilla, I'm going to stamp this one more time. This is going to give me a two-tone look when I'm finished. And I'm aiming just for the words on and those little lines that are around them. We have our two pieces, and I'm going to go ahead and use my paper snips, and I am going to cut this out. So I'm going to leave a little bit of vanilla around the edge on both sides because I want to create a banner tip. And then in here, I am just going to follow this wave. I'm not worried about making it straight or making it perfect. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Cutting it out just underneath those words. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a banner tip on each end. So I'm going to put a small snip right here in the paper. And I'm going to come from the outside edge to the center of that slit to make a banner tip. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. All right, so now I have my small banner. I'm going to mount that right over the top of this one using mini dimensionals. But I'm going to first mount this to the base cardstock that I want to layer it on. So I'm going to flip that over. I'm going to add some adhesive to my back side. And I'm going to layer it on this piece of cherry cobbler. I'm going to flip this piece over, and with my mini dimensionals, and I like to use my paper piercing tool for this. These are really, really small mini dimensionals, and I love them for these projects for the detail work because they fit so nicely. I like to balance them out since they are going to go through the mail machine when I mail my Christmas card. And then all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take off that paper backing to those mini dimensionals. If you're having a tough time, take your fingernail and press it down inside the dimensional. That'll help lift the outside edges of the paper so you can get that backing off. And then this is going to get mirrored right over the top of the original ones. So now we have a nice two-tone greeting for our card. I've brought in my magnetic platform for this next step. I like to use that when I'm using framelits to help give me a really good contact between the framelit and the paper. I've got a clear mat for the bottom to protect it, and now I'm going to be using those framelits we talked about. They are called the Card Front Builder Thinlits, and it is offered as a bundle with the Carol of Christmas stamp set, or you can purchase them individually. Here's what I like about them. In addition to the beautiful treescapes you've got skyline, you've got dies for the appropriate different ornaments that are in there, but you've got these beautiful borders for your card that will die cut openings. Really lots of fun. I'm going to lay a piece of gold foil on my platform and a piece of cherry cobbler on my platform. And I've pulled out the single tree die for my cobbler, and I have that reindeer die for the gold foil. If your clear mats look anything like mine, which means they're loved and they're used, you're going to find that they have a scratchy surface. Sometimes when you lay them over the top and you die cut, you end up with that scratchy look on top of your foil. So here's a tip for you. Lay a piece of scrap computer paper right over that to protect it, and then put your clear mat over it and then crank it through. That's going to ensure that all those scratch marks stay off of your pretty foil. All right, so we've got our reindeer here. I'm going to give him a little gentle push. And then, of course, we have our Christmas tree here as well. I've also cut a piece of the mini gold sequin trim, and this is about 8 inches, because I want to use this as some interest on the front of my card. So I'm going to go ahead and lay my card how I want it. I can always trim this if it's a little bit too long, so I'm going to lay my sequins there. On the back of my greeting, I'm going to flip that over. And I'm switching over now to my regular size dimensionals. I'm going to add those each in the 4 corners. And I'm going to lay one in the center. I'm going to take off the paper backing to those as well. And then I'm going to eye the front of my card and decide where I want that to fall. I'm going to need to move this over a little bit to the right because I want to leave room for that tree and that deer. So I'm going to lay that here. So those dimensionals now have caught my sequence and held that in place. All right, remember the tree? What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to use my mini dimensionals this time. And I'm going to place some of those right down the spine of my tree. I want to add one here near the top, but you can see even with the mini dimensionals, they're a little bit too large. So another tip for you, while they're on the paper, simply just cut one in half. And then I'm going to use my paper piercing tool to help me lift that little piece up. And then I'm going to wedge that here at the top. What you don't want is you don't want your dimensionals sticking out of the circumference of the paper because obviously it's going to show from the front. So I'm going to take that off. And I'm going to lay my tree next to my greeting. I'm going to tuck a little bit of it behind, wanting to make sure that it doesn't extend past the base of my card. So I'm going to lay that here. Before we put the deer on, I'm going to push this to the side. We're going to be doing our glitter. I pour my glitter in a Tupperware container and I use a spoon. That helps keep my fingers clean and it keeps it very contained. With my fine tip glue, I'm going to add just some squiggles of glue down the front of that tree. So I'm going to unscrew the white portion of the cap. I always like to check it to make sure that there's no leftover dried glue there. And I'm not going to work real slow because the glue is very, very thin. So I'm just going to get it started, and then I'm just going to go back and forth here just to fill it in. And then I'm going to hold this over my glitter container, and then I'm going to sprinkle generously, and then I'm going to flick. The glitter is very fine with Stampin' Up, so I want to make sure that it statically doesn't stick where I don't want it. So I've got a little bit of pizzazz there going on my tree, and that helps coordinate with my sequence. I want to make sure I recap my glue right away because this does dry quickly. There's a needle in the cap that'll allow me to put my finger here right next to the tip and then glide that tip down inside and then twist the cap back on, so I'm assured that it won't clog next time I go to use it. So here we are with our little reindeer, and you probably guessed it, it's going to be a mini dimensional. So I'm going to grab one of those off of here. I'm going to add that to the back of my reindeer and peel off that paper backing. And because he's rather small, one is sufficient. And then I'm going to mount him so he's on the same plane as the rest of my tree. So right there over the glitter. So there you have it. Here's the card that we created today. The one I created before you joined me. I'm so glad that you're here, everyone. Make sure you head over to my blog. You can find the link down here on YouTube in the description of the video. There you'll be able to find pictures and cutting dimensions for today's card. It'll take you right to the blog post. While you're there, subscribe to my blog so you don't miss any of the upcoming inspiration that I share, and check out my online classes tab. I've got a bunch of fun ways for you to stamp with me from home. Thanks again for joining me, everyone. Have a great day.